Thank you. Brian Hayes.
Thank you, President, and I'd like to thank Mrs. König for her presentation here this afternoon. As a member of which came from Ireland and saw this spectacular bailout of the Irish banks, I was very happy when she said in reply to another question that the rules are the rules, that we have moved historically from a system of bailouts to bail-ins, and those are the rules that apply to all banks in and across the system that is operational. I'm glad she made that point clear and loud for everyone to hear. My question is related to the fund. She has told the committee that I think 10 billion is now in place, and the objective was, I think, 55 billion over a period of 8 years. Firstly, are we sticking to that as the objective? That's the first question. And just in terms of the answer to Mr. Damasi's question earlier, country by country, because I know she cannot reply bank by bank, as it were, or even groups of banks. The Irish contribution, I think, was to be 1.8 billion from the Irish banking sector over the period of time of the plan. Is she confident that we will have achieved that over the period of time in her discussions with national supervisors in Ireland? Two remaining issues. One relates to the cooperation that she is getting, and indeed the Single Resolution Board is getting, in terms of a supervisory approach across the system. Could she comment on that? Is it consistent in all cases? Is there room for improvement? And if there is room for improvement, what are the areas of improvement in terms of her dialogue with national supervisors? And my final remark and question relates to the issue that one of my colleagues raised on NPLs. We have evidence in this committee that I think at least 8 to 10 member states have banks with NPLs of over 5%. She has to be concerned of that, as I'm sure all of us are. And that being the case, and given the potential contagion this could have across the banking sector, do you think enough is being done to deal with that crisis right now?
Thank you for your question. Let me start with your question on the fund. The 55 billion were calculated at the very beginning by the Commission as an assumption of 1% of covered deposits at the end of this period. I would assume, looking at the current numbers, that we will end with a number that is beyond 55 billion. Our challenge for now is, and for those of you that like math, they can imagine that, we have to set up this fund in as good as it gets, even steps over these 8 years to reach the number of 1% at the end of the time. The unfortunate thing is we don't know precisely that number. This is why last year we decided to raise a contribution which was 1.05% of last year's deposits, assuming that there will be a growth in which could lead us now, don't nail me down, to 65, perhaps billion or whatever. We are adjusting that on an annual basis. I don't see any argument, but I don't have the number also at hand, that the Irish contribution will substantially change. What we see is, and that was holding true in particular to Ireland, that clearly the move of banks in and out of a country might change the basis, and this is something which will then also change the annual contribution, but we are treating everyone equal here. Going to your second question, cooperation with the single supervisory mechanism, who for us is the main supervisor we are cooperating with, is good. There is one area which I'm always mentioning, and that is, well, it's probably a more logical way. The easiest loss is always the first one. So what we need to make sure going forward, but I think we are all aware of that, is that early intervention measures ought to be taken early and not 5 minutes ahead of 12 o'clock, and decisions need to be taken swiftly. But I think there is no disagreement with the ECB on this, and there is good cooperation. Last but not least, NPLs. Of course, we are looking into that now, again, also on NPLs, not even within one member state, definitely not across the board. They are all the same. And when you look at the one or the other situation, you have a very isolated pocket of NPL, then you can, for your resolution planning, say, well, I have to deal with that. But it's not a gift that keeps on giving. It's an isolated pocket. You have various topics. We come across that in our work when we deal with a resolution plan and the question, how would you deal for a given bank with this situation? But first and foremost, I think we are very much also in agreement with the ECB and their work to accelerate the workout of NPLs.